Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hi, it's another edition of What's the Point? And this episode, as everyone I've had so far, I've got a guest who I'm just thrilled to be able to speak with and have him share his insights and his experience and how he has found his purpose. So my guest today is Frank Bell Jr., who is the executive director of Elevate St. Louis. And one of the things that I really like about Frank is when I ask my guests, how would you like to be introduced? Not that I always do, but Frank is one of the people that started off by saying, I'm a husband and a father and family first. And that just touches my heart. So Frank Bell, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Bill. This is a true privilege.
Well, it's something I've been looking forward to, as you know, for some time. We started talking about this, goodness, over a year ago, and everything finally came together. So, for our listeners, share with us a little bit. Let's get right to it. Share with us a little bit about what Elevate St. Louis is and its role in the community.
Thanks for the opportunity to share, Bill. Yeah, Elevate St. Louis is a youth development program that's embedded inside of public schools. We tend to find areas where students of color are not doing as great as their white counterpart when it comes to academic attainment. There's several Elevates all across the nation, planted by Elevate USA out of Denver, Colorado, and they were especially interested in coming to St. Louis, particularly on the heels of the civil unrest in Ferguson back in 2015. But since we've come to this community, Elevate St. Louis has been a really good strategic partner for the Ferguson Florissant School District to help young people who may come from challenged, traumatic, or disadvantaged backgrounds to really discover a sense of purpose, acquire the life skills needed to chase after that purpose, set goals, graduate high school, and then go on to be thriving contributors in the community.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, and that it is growing nationally. I believe was Elevate St. Louis. I think was the eighth Elevate that was started in 2017, which is when you were hired as executive director. So your background is higher education, your master's, undergraduate and master's from Iowa State. You've spent a lot of your life has been in service-oriented work in community building and education, that type of thing. How did you get to Iowa State? You are from St. Louis, I think, originally.
Yes.
And anyone that's from St. Louis knows I've got to ask this question. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school at Metropolitan High School. It was a pretty challenging magnet school where a lot of folks really found their purpose. Betty Wheeler was my principal at the time, and I tell you, she was just a huge source of inspiration for hundreds of us.
Well, that's another great example, just to make the point of we never know how we are going to impact other people and the ripple effect of that. So, Betty, I didn't catch her
Wheeler?
name. Betty Wheeler probably did the very best she could to touch lives, and hopefully she has an indication of how much she's touched lives and how it's being passed on. So you left St. Louis to go to Iowa State.
Yeah,
There you got an education, and I think you met someone there.
yeah, I left in 1985 to go to Iowa State University, and my story is a little different. I left St. Louis to go to college. I really didn't go to college for college. I was rudderless and didn't have a good sense of direction of what I wanted to do. I just know I wanted to take that next step, and Iowa State University was close enough to me where to St. Louis, where if it didn't work out well, the walk back home wasn't going to be too long because my parents weren't going to come and get me. But yeah, while I was there, I had a chance to meet my bride of 30 years now, Rosa. Interesting to note that she and I have cousins that live like across the street and next door to each other, but we never laid eyes on each other until we got to Iowa State.
Well, isn't that funny how things turn out? Just amazing. What I love that you just said, and it fits so perfectly with the reason I do What's the Point, is that you went to university with just kind of a general concept that you wanted to take the next step, but you said you were rudderless without purpose. Um, a lot of us are that way and have been that way. How did you find a rudder?
Well, it was through people believing in me before I believed in myself. And we'll get to this when we talk about Elevate St. Louis in a moment. But I showed promise that I could be a good student. I was raised with a certain measure of integrity, always cared about people, was a bit charismatic. And so people saw that, with some time and patience and lots of mentoring support, that I could discover a pathway forward for myself. But the turning point for me was from Dr. Thomas Walsh, who was my academic advisor in my undergraduate program. But what I didn't know at the time, he was also the chairman of the department that I was in. And so, not knowing how to be a good student in college, not knowing how to manage my time and who to connect myself with, I found myself academically dismissed twice from the university. Not that I didn't have the ability, I just couldn't find a way to put it all together.
Hmm.
So Dr. Walsh
Hmm.
sat me down in his office and he said to me, Frank, you're going to be one of the best students to never graduate from Iowa State University if you don't get this checked out. And then from there, he introduced me to a great gentleman by the name of Dr. George Jackson, who led the Office of Minority Student Support at Iowa State University. And Dr. Jackson, he said to me, Frank, all young people can fly. Some just need a longer runway than others, and we are runway builders. So I had a chance to work with him and a gentleman by the name of Al Campbell. They helped me to get connected to the Academic Success Center, where I finally had taken a learning styles inventory and discovered that I'm a kinesthetic auditory learner. I have to move, and that's why I fidget when I talk and walk and things. And auditory meaning that I learn best by hearing it. So if I hear it and I'm moving, the uptake is fast. And so with Dr. Walsh's help and Dr. Jackson and Al Campbell's help, I went from a student that was a C and D student to a student that was on Dean's List in a matter of 2 semesters because of their help. And it
Wow.
brought a lot of confidence into my life. My self-esteem went through the roof, and I learned that, learning for me was tied closely to my self-confidence. And then it became a delight to be in the classroom because I really felt like for the first time I was a competent contributor.
That's so powerful. A confident contributor. What a great phrase, too. You also used a phrase that I love. You are academically dismissed. Words matter, and those are some great words to talk about that. And you certainly aren't the first, and you won't be the last. But it does point out how many of us need mentoring and guidance. And in particular, in my experience, both for myself and with other people that I work with and speak with, oftentimes leaving high school, uh, students have not been given the practical approach of a lot of things, life-wise and study-wise. And oftentimes, sadly, it's a matter of let's just, and I'm not throwing stones, but sometimes it's just let's move these people on to the next level and keep the flow moving, which can be improved. So you experienced the impact of someone recognizing your traits and your abilities.
Yeah.
How did that help move you into all of it? Because for the past 30 plus years, you've done community work and development, right?
Yes. Yeah. You know, this has been, I guess, a recurring theme for me in my life until about I turned 30, that I had people believe in me before I believed in myself. But also too, it gave me a sense for what's needed in our communities. Um, I was challenged by the director of admissions at Iowa State University. And when I was working there, I was also working in the same department that helped me to graduate, the same place where Dr. Jackson was working. So he had moved on to a different job. And I came back to the university to work, and they said, Frank, you figured out how to make the university work for you. We've seen you not be a good student and become a great student, and seen you connect with faculty and staff and people across the campus. So we would love for you to work with us. And so at the time, I was really, my sole ambition was to become the director of the same office that helped me. I didn't think about anything beyond that. I didn't care about anything
Mm.
else beyond that. Was working
Okay.
on my master's degree and such too. And the admissions director said to me, he said, Frank, you got the tools to go on and be a president of a university. Why would you just want to be the director of admissions? And I looked at him and I said, what is wrong with just wanting to be the director of, not the director of admissions, but the director of the office I was working in? I said, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't students have people close to them that are operating at the highest levels that are there to make sure that the door stays open for them and that we continue to build runways? So it wasn't that I lacked ambition. I just always had an attitude of excellence. But it seemed to me that the best place for me to be was be close to the work rather than be so high up in policy work that I'm away from the
Okay.
students.
Well, that's great insight. The fact that you were able to recognize where you are best suited to share your talents and skills and to pass on what had been given to you. So staying close to the fray. Let me just take a quick step away from that story before we get into Elevate St. Louis, because what I want to do is tell the story of how you and I met. There is a fabulous church in St. Louis called the Crossing Church. And several years ago, they hosted an event that was meant to try to bring awareness and education and understanding across communities in the greater St. Louis area about all of the unrest that had happened in Ferguson and, frankly, some of the racial tensions that were going on at that time. And they showcased a movie called Show Me Democracy. Uh, I walked into that room not being a member of that church at the time. And in the back of the room, I saw a table with a very good-looking couple, and it turned out to be you, Frank, and your wife, Rose. And I thought, well, if I'm here to kind of learn more about race, let me sit down with this black couple. And then the table filled out, and it was fabulous. How did that movie and that event, Show Me Democracy, impact you, if at all?
Oh, it had a profound impact upon me because I believe it cast a light on things that were happening that were working for the benefit of the community instead of all of the cameras that were on the bonfires in the middle of the street and clashes between protesters and the police. Show Me Democracy. The movie was developed by a gentleman by the name of Dan Paris,
Mm-hmm.
and Dan had been wanting to find a way to bring as many people as possible into grassroots and community-based work. And so, Show Me Democracy was a really great example of how different community-based resources, a nonprofit, and some state legislators got with some of the protesters and helped them to turn that energy into policy drafts that they were able to present to the Missouri state government. It showed collaboration at its finest, where people had a passion and a drive and an energy to make change. We're working with people who were part of systems to be able to bring about change much more swiftly and help them to focus their energies. So to me, it was a great example of what's already working right now, and it also was a challenge to me to refocus my attention on what's working instead of continue to focus on what's not working in the St. Louis region.
Well, that's so very well said. My impression of that evening was that it was the first effort that I had experienced of trying to present an all side, unbiased view of what was going on, both in the community prior to Michael Brown and after Michael Brown, and then in the greater community, and frankly, across our country, because that event, in addition to the movie, had uh, presenters on the stage that included some of the most vocal protesters during the actual what's called riots, protests. It had the state police office, the state trooper who was in charge of things in the streets at that time. It had a very balanced look, and it ended up being, for me, very, very encouraging to see and to reinforce my belief that reaching out a hand and just talking to people as people can yield tremendous results. So did it change anything nationally? Absolutely not. But it started to help quite a few people in that room have a better understanding and maybe open our minds to different perspectives, no matter what our perspective was going into that evening.
I think that I agree with you in all the things that you said. One of the things I appreciate about the Crossing Church is that I see it as a bridge building ministry. They do a really good job of bringing all kinds of people together to have conversations and then take the next critical steps needed for change in the community. But
Mhm.
also, too, I saw in the room that at the tables that you were at with me is that everyone was focusing on what's next. How can we be a part of a very quiet but effective movement on neighbors helping neighbors to see what's possible if we bring our best selves to the table?
Well, it did that, and certainly at a bare minimum, it allowed me to meet you and Rosa, and that was a gift, and I'm very pleased for that, and that's kind of why we're here today. And I think it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to share some of that message, and to just be a bit of an example that reaching out a hand, we can find friends and allies and people that we admire that we may not have otherwise met had we not stuck our hand out. So with that, let's move more directly back into Elevate St. Louis because specifically, in particular, since we met around the Ferguson uh, issues, the fact that this is primarily at this point focused in the Ferguson Florissant School District, I think, is pretty topical. Tell us more about Elevate, please.
Yeah, we got started in that community at the invitation of Dr. Davis. So shortly after the civil unrest in Ferguson, he came on as the superintendent to help the school district to get back on track, re-earn its accreditation, and to continue to move in a positive direction with helping young people take that next important step in life. And he had heard about Elevate through other means before he took on the job, and he wanted it to be a part of his turnaround plan for the district. So Elevate St. Louis has this distinction of being the only Elevate affiliate to come into existence at the invitation of a superintendent. Usually, the way we get started in
Okay.
the community is Elevate USA will look around the country and they're seeking to find public school districts where students of color are lagging behind their white counterpart in several categories like graduation rates and attendance and such. And then they would come to town, build a board of directors and people to support the program. And then they would go knock on the door of a school district and say, hey, we've got this world class curriculum that will help students develop life skills and develop character. It will help with graduation rates. And it will also help to support your entire student body. And we offer it to you for free. Now, we've never been told no with that, but that's how it happens. Elevate USA tends to reach out first, but like I said, in our instance, Dr. Davis invited us in.
And just for clarity, Dr. Davis is the superintendent of the Ferguson Florissant School District here in the greater St. Louis area.
Yes, yes, he is.
Okay. Um, Let me ask you a question that I suspect several of the listeners have in their mind at this point. Uh, how do you address people that say, why are you focusing just on students of color that are challenged rather than a broader spectrum of demographics?
Very good question. We get that often. And we take a look at the students in public education around the country that struggle the most. And we focus on urban centers where we find them the most. Now, I'll just have to add just a little bit of clarification there is that our primary focus may be on students of color, but we do have white students, biracial students in our classrooms as well too. So we are working with let me just put it this way. Elevate St. Louis, even though we're bedded in the Ferguson Florissant School District, we're focused on the students who need us most. And they come to us by recommendation of the teachers and counselors in the classroom. And we just give them a simple descriptor. Recommend any student enroll in our program that if they had adequate support from at least one caring adult outside their families, they can go on to do great things. Right. And so the principal and the teachers and the counselors would look at us and say, Frank, that's pretty much any kid in the building. And we say, exactly. Because every kid in the building needs to develop character, grit, life skills, and a post secondary education plan that will launch them into the world.
I'm so glad to hear that explanation, and I'm glad I asked the question up front because I didn't want the misperception that this is exclusively for students of color. It just turns out that the largest number of students who are in need tend to be those students of color. Um, But the other thing I love, and how ironic that you've gotten into a national organization whose slogan matches your personal slogan, starting with when you were touched by so many people in your college journey. No one gets there alone. Talk about that phrase.
Well, just as I alluded to in my own personal journey, every significant thing, milestone that I have ever achieved or set a goal to attain has always come with the support of someone else, someone who believed in me and wanted to see me succeed. And the people that I mentioned, Dr. Thomas Walsh, he was a white gentleman and he was almost like a grandfatherly figure to me. But he saw in me, just the potential that I had, and it didn't matter the color of my skin or who I was. He saw me as a student that was capable, that he wanted to see earn a degree. And he was one of the biggest cheerleaders I had on graduation day for me for my undergraduate degree and for my master's degree. And there was a whole host of people who did not look like me along the way. From my first grade teacher, Mrs. Forrest, who cut my face with her hands and looked at me in the eyes and said, "You can be anything in the world that you want to be." And she went down the row of all of us in the classroom who were all black kids, and she said those things to us. And for some of us in the classroom, it was a moving moment and we hadn't heard it before. I was fortunate enough to have, but some of my classmates didn't. But then there's a whole host of people who look like me and Latinos and people from different countries that I met when I was in college that all took an interest in me. And so I believe that I am the byproduct of a lot of people's time, effort, attention, expertise, and encouragement. And so we bring that to the table with Elevate St. Louis, and that's a great slogan for our national organization. We truly believe no one gets there alone. And so the young people in our program, we recognize they don't belong to us. We steward that time when they're with us, and we hope to enhance their skills and abilities while they're with us. But we also do our work in collaboration with school-based organizations and support services, including the teachers, counselors, and administrative staff. But we also work with a whole host of collaboration points outside of the school district too. Social service agencies, other nonprofits, churches, and businesses. And as a whole, we create that village to be able to make sure that every young person can identify what they're great at and pursue it with an attitude of excellence.
Again, very powerful. But the one of the points that strikes me, Frank, is in the world of finance, there's the concept of compound interest. And what I hear from you is taking that concept there, compound caring, compound guidance, compound mentoring, however you want to put it. So your first grade teacher literally cupped your face and literally touched you physically and mentally and in your soul, I suspect, for you to remember that to this day. And the fact that you are bringing that out to others, I see that similar to what we experienced at that movie review at the Crossing Church, where a movement rarely happens where just everyone suddenly gets on board. It's a lot of little pieces that and little sparks that start to fire up and start to move things. That's also how I see us as individuals finding our purpose, where it's a bunch of little sparks that suddenly hit to start that flame of passion once we find our purpose. I, there's so many things I want to say. I'm kind of tongue-tied, but let me go back to something you said because I think it's also very important. You talked about working with teachers. How does Elevate work with the teachers? Because they are going to most likely have the ability to touch those students' lives on a much more regular basis. What efforts do you all have with the teachers themselves?
Hey, let me answer that question by first starting with the program focuses that we have. First, we start with accredited classes where we've been approved by the State Board of Education to teach our character development and life skills curriculum at the middle school and high school level where students can take those classes for an elective credit. So that's where find ourselves embedded in the school buildings. So we're experiencing
Okay.
what the teachers are experiencing. We deliver our curriculum in a classroom that's set up in the same way that all the other teachers have as well too. So we're around not only our students for the better part of a school day, but when we're not having classes, we are around the teachers for the better part of the school day as well too.
Mm-hmm.
So when we first came into the building, we were seen as this program that was there,
Mm-hmm.
and you guys are going to be here, and you're going to do what you do, and you'll leave. Well, when I had the conversation with Dr. Davis and also with Dr. Gerald, the principal at McClure High School, where our program got its start, I share with them that we're there for the building. We want to bring the best of ourselves to help you make sure that you're able to meet the needs of these students and launch them well. So when we're not in class, we want to connect with the teachers. And so that was met with a bit of skepticism because many school districts see
Hmm.
programs come and go.
Yeah.
But little by little, we started to find ways to build time with those teachers. We started to take our lunch breaks with them in the teachers' lounge. We started to share with them how we were able to make progress with some very challenging students that they had seen for 1, 2, or 3 years. But we also were there to be a source of encouragement for them. We wanted to make sure that we invested in what we would call the constants of school education, and that's the teachers. Our students are variable, and at the high school levels, we tend to turn over the student culture once every 4 years, every time we graduate a class. And they come
Hmm.
with all kinds of challenges, but all types of skills as well too. But the mix is a little different from year to year. But the constants in the building are going to be the administrators, the teachers, and the other staff. So we wanted to make sure we had just as deep of relationships with those folks as we did with the students. And the results then have been collaborations where we're working with students in some of the most challenging circumstances. The difference between our staff, which are called teacher mentors, and teachers in the building is that we spend 50% of our time at school with the students, and then 50% of our time is with the students outside of school, after school, evenings, weekends, and during the summers because we are a year-round program. So, as we're able to invest more time with the students and learn more about them, we actually have a chance to act on an internal mantra that we say every student, every story. We want to intimately know every
Mm.
student, and we also want to know their origin stories or their background stories. How is it they've come to be who they are in, when we meet them? And then with that information, we can then better assess how we can shape elements of our program to meet each individual student's needs. And when it's appropriate, we would share non confidential information with those teachers to help them get more insight because we're doing home visits. We're taking them bowling in the evenings. We're out at the amusement park with them on the weekends. We're going camping with them in the summers. So we become, I guess you could say, another layer of advocate besides the parents inside the school building. And then there's
Hmm.
teachers that will say, well, gosh, had I known that these other issues were there, I might have taken a different approach. And so now, in our coming to the end of our fourth year there, we are seen as equal partners in the education endeavors in the building because of our investment in the time with the teachers and administrators.
There's so much to unpack there. Let me start with reiterating once again the importance of reaching out and looking for what we have in common and the commonalities as opposed to the differences, and uh, seeking to not break down walls, but to recognize that there are walls and try to find a way over them, around them, or through them. And that is the challenge that you and all of your staff faced by being looked at as, oh, here comes another program, another uh, you know, uh, here today, gone tomorrow type of thing. So you had to build credibility and you had to start to let them know you by sharing with them the value that you're giving to their students and to them as teachers. Is that fair?
Very fair.
Okay. And then for you to be able to, and I'm saying you, but I mean your entire staff, Frank. It's just for clarification to anyone listening. Frank is not the solo person working through Elevate St. Louis or Elevate nationally. Um, your your people are able to bring an aspect to the teachers that they haven't had in the past. And as you just gave an example, can really benefit from getting the full story, or at least a more complete story, as opposed to just someone that's in their class that's not performing well or not paying attention. Do you have examples of that you can share? And I understand confidentiality, but do you have one or two case studies of how that may have helped, where it literally has helped turn a student around and or turned a teacher around?
Sure, I can aggregate some situations and give you some
Perfect.
general stories. So, what we find is that sometimes when students come to school, they may have a moment where there may be an emotional outburst and they may act out in a way that may disrupt class. And so, what we have discovered, along with many in the schools too, is that a lot of what surfaces at schools happens outside of school in their genesis. And so, oftentimes, the students will come and they'll have a set of bad moments. But what we've discovered is because they feel comfortable there, they feel safe at school. And so ultimately, what they're carrying gets unloaded there, sometimes in some ways that can be pretty disturbing. But at the same time, we
Mm-hmm.
recognize that this is a fellow human being that's in need. They've experienced some type of trauma. So we start with the question of, hey, what happened to you today? What's going on in your life? We never start with what's wrong with you. And so we've
Good.
had a lot of students who have had outbursts in our classroom. And because we teach in a triad fashion where we have three teachers in the classroom, that's our model. The lead teacher can continue to teach, an assisting teacher can continue to help, but then that third person then has an opportunity to walk the student out in the hallway. And so we've had several students say that there's challenges at home, or I'm at school today once again without getting a meal, or there's been physical abuse, or I'm in a really tough relationship right now and I don't feel safe. So in those things, we are able to build a trusting relationship with those students up front, and then they share what those challenges are, and then we work discreetly behind the scenes to intervene as best as we can. Now we are mandatory reporters, so anytime a student comes to us and say that they are in a dangerous situation, we do have to
Mm-hmm.
act immediately. And the vast majority of the times, the students don't mind it. Some no don't trust the process and may feel as though that
Mm-hmm.
if we act on something, particularly if it's a home issue, uh, then then it may make it worse before it becomes better.
Right.
But
Right.
because we take a long-term relationship approach with the students, more times than not, they will trust us. And even though they know they're going to have to kind of grit their teeth through the process and may get tougher, they know that we'll walk with them every step of the way. We won't abandon them because we've demonstrated that. So we've helped some students get out of really tough relationships. And there's one young lady, I won't mention her name, but uh, when we met her, unfortunately, she had fallen into the trap of affection with boys because she had no father at home. And
Mm-hmm.
so, for the longest time, she was always searching for someone to make her feel special. And of course, young people are inexperienced. The brains are not well formed at that age. They don't understand the risks involved in dealing with some type of relationships. And so she found herself, I guess, trapped in a cycle of sexual experiences with some boys. And and unfortunately, we're in an unfiltered society right now. And so these kids were having a conversation in the stairwell with her, trying to convince her to leave school and go and do things with them. And so our staff was able to befriend her and to walk with her for a couple of semesters and help her to develop a sense of purpose. We showed her love for all the right reasons, meaning not what you can do for us, but because of what we saw in you. And it was the type of
Mm-hmm.
love that was sacrificial. We spent time with her as she worked through these tough challenges. We made sure that she had great female mentors to help her develop a sense of self worth. And the culmination of that was one day she was going down the hallway, and a couple of those boys had surrounded her, trying to entice her to leave school to go with them. And she turned to those guys and she says, "I know what love is, and what you want from me, that's not love. I know what love is because of what I've experienced with the people at Elevate St. Louis. They love me for me and not for anything that I might be able to do for them. They just care only about me. So I don't want that type of love. I know what love is, and they spent the time with me to help me to understand who I am and who I can be." And then from there, she has her grades have improved, and I think that she's headed off to college this year too. So we find students where we find them in the situations and
Mm-hmm.
conditions where they're at. But what we endeavor to do is stick with them. Where a lot of times kids will tell us that, my parents don't get me, or another adult, doesn't understand me, or they think that I've done some things that I can't come back from, and so no one will want to be around me.
Right. Well, that's a powerful story specifically to that young lady, and it reminds me that we all have our own story and we all have something we're striving for. But this, by the same token that you had to build and create relationship and trust with the teachers, I would suspect it was even more of a challenge to build that trust with students who oftentimes are maybe not seeing that love and that trust in all areas of their personal life. And frankly, most of the teachers don't have the time to kind of build that. So that bridge is seems to be a pretty strong reason for Elevate to continue to exist. I would also bet that those boys that kept talking to that girl, they have things that, she was trying to find love from the lack of a father figure. They were trying to find something for whatever reason. We all have that. Um, but let me get back to how you look at the students and their progress. So you measure student growth in four ways: school success, their character development and life skills, their developmental assets, and then their community engagement. So to hear that how that all comes together, again, that's so much more of a full, rich package than the typical teacher can get to. And the fact that you're with them 50% outside of school uh, says a lot. Share with us how that whole program works and the details of it.
Be glad to. Thank you much. So we meet the students in the classes each school year, and then from there we develop high quality relationships with those students in the space, and then we invite them to do things outside of school. It could be anything from tossing a ball around in the park to visiting a local state park to do a little hiking, a little fishing, get them out of their comfort zones and get them to a place where there's really poor cell phone reception so they're not on social media. And then from there, we spend time with the students in what we call adventure programs in the summer. So we have the accredited classes, we do mentoring with the students. Adventure for us, then, the slogan there is growth through challenge. And so we may do
Okay.
anything from do team building activities, at a camp, or we may ask the students to come up with some type of community service project where they will plan it, put on the event, and assess the quality of the event from start to finish. And we're just there to assist them. And the last feature we bring to the table is college and career readiness, where we're helping the students to think about what should my life include, or what should I pursue after I graduate high school. So over time, we're embedding in their thinking that they will graduate high school, and now what should be the next appropriate steps.
Mm.
And we guarantee that if a student is with us over 3 semesters, they will graduate from high school with a post-secondary education plan that includes enrollment in higher education or a trade or technical program, joining the military, or obtaining a living wage job right out of high school.
And those are all the elements that you and myself and many others got to the level of university without really having embedded all that much. So two things quickly. First, uh, it reminds me of the coach in basketball who, at the timeout at the critical point of the game, looks and says, "Okay, Frank, after you make this free throw, here's what you do." So what you're saying is after you graduate high school, as it's an assumption and that builds confidence and that starts to get students that hear that to say, okay, I'm going to do that. And that's really a powerful approach. How do things work with Elevate and the students' parents?
Yeah, we had to learn how to build relationships with parents. So the National Elevate model is student centric, and we're very, very focused on the students. But from my background in working in higher education, community work, and youth ministries for almost 30 years, what I come to understand is that if the parents are not involved, then you might have a one step forward, two step back experience with the students. We have to
Hmm.
recognize that every student has grown up in households with traditions. Some of those traditions may help the student be successful, and some may be traditions that are just things that are just embedded in the family culture. We have several students who tell us that it's not a tradition for the males to graduate high school and go on to higher education. So we have to build relationships with the parents by, first of all, helping their son or daughters make progress. Now, every mother or father wants to see their young people do well. So we just take that as a given. And then as they begin to see their young people improve in school, they may see their attendance go up, behavior referrals like in school detention or suspensions go down or become non existent anymore. They start to notice that there's a change in my child's behavior. So now,
Hmm.
how is that happening outside of what I'm doing? Well, they know that their young people are enrolled in Elevate St. Louis. And so we have worked very hard to make sure that once we win the relationship with the young person, now we work to win the relationship and trust with the adults. Because in for most households, it's the parents or the adults at home that create the environment that the young person is in. The young person has very little control over that. They may influence it, but they grow up in the traditions and customs in the family that that cause them to be accepted at home. Now, one of the barriers that we did run into is that some of our young people were changing at such a rapid rate because they finally found what they were looking for in a way to get a constant source of support and encouragement that that there was some friction at home between some of the students and their parents, And I remember one parent, this one young lady had became quite frustrated with what she saw at home. She said, "Well, I wish that you and Dad were like my Elevate St. Louis teachers." And the parent said, "Well, you can go live with your Elevate St. Louis teachers." Um,
Of course.
and so we wanted to be able to help diffuse those situations before they get started. So what we have done a really good job of is inviting parents out to parent socials, before the pandemic. But when the pandemic happened, Bill, we took advantage of a great opportunity. When students had to go home to learn, we found that 90% of our students logged on to online learning, and the percentage for students in the general student body was much smaller than that. And it was because
Mm.
we had built this relationship over time where the
Mhm.
students migrated over to that platform to follow us there with our classes. And that residual energy bled over into the other classes, and students were attending other classes as well. But we also recognize too we're in a low income community where there's a lot of generational poverty. And so when the pandemic hit, a lot of people who held hourly jobs found themselves suddenly out of work because they did not
Mhm.
know, we didn't know how to live in this pandemic world that we were in. We didn't know much about COVID, how it was transmitted or anything. We also discovered too that a lot of our parents in the program, they were in-home healthcare workers. So there was a lack of masks and gloves, right? And PPEs. Well, we were able to partner with a gentleman who works in the garment industry, and he was able to get masks and PPEs when hardly anybody could. And so we were able to then supply a lot of households with masks and gloves and hand sanitizer and a bunch of other things. And we were also able to partner with several foundations to generate about $30,000 of monies that we use as just pass-throughs to help those families. Mind you, kids are going home to learn. They're giving
Mhm.
Wi-Fi equipment and laptops to work from home. But if parents don't have income, well, they can't pay their electric bills. Students can't learn. So we were able to
Right.
make $500 grants available to families to be able to help supplement their income until they can get back on their feet. Well, I tell you, when you put a little money into someone's home to help them move, their needs forward, they tend to listen a little more. And so we feel like we bought their attention for a moment, but we wanted to come back behind that now and build relationships. So, Bill, we put those masks on and gloves, and my staff and I volunteered to go do home visits. And so we talked to students outside of windows, behind closed doors, and to make sure that they knew we cared. And
Yeah.
then when we got social distancing guidelines from the CDC that summer, we then bought a bunch of lawn chairs, a bunch of coolers, and yard games, and we were socially distanced out in their yards, on sidewalks, and
Okay.
in parks. And
Fabulous.
that's how we built the relationship with families.
Well, even when it comes to parents and family, the slogan "No one gets there alone" sometimes is spot on, right? So, Frank Bell, Executive Director of Elevate St. Louis, I love what you're doing in the community and with the students. But let me go back to where we started, and let's talk about Frank Bell and your personal journey. Share with me a little bit more about how you went from how you got to where you are today, because we've talked about this. My approach is the purpose principle, that we have to find a purpose, which in turn ignites our passion, and then persistence keeps us going. Help help me understand and help our listeners understand how your purpose became more clarified, how you discovered it and or clarified, because you're certainly living it now.
Thanks for inviting me to share the story here. I'm trying to come up with a Reader's Digest condensed version here to tell it. But I'll just start, in my home life. I'm number six of eight kids, and I'm the third firstborn in my family. My mother and father were both previously married, and then they got together and had my younger brother and myself. And I was always the kid that had the strongest personality of all the other kids. And then there's something that was just embedded in me from birth, that I just cared about other people and had a measure of drive and initiative, and always wanted to just see the best in other folks. And I was always willing to take on a leadership role. I was always the person too to stand in the gap to advocate for someone else. I tell you, I got beat up a lot in my neighborhood for standing up for the underdog, because I just couldn't see another person just be treated poorly like that. So sometimes I would step in and let the other person escape, and then I'd take the punishment for it. But the other challenge too for me, Bill, was that my dad didn't have a father in his life growing up, and he was a kid of the streets and very charismatic person, very community minded too as well. But he fell into drug and alcohol abuse, and even though he was
Hmm.
home, it was like he was miles and miles away. So during my
Right.
formative years, even though my dad was home, he wasn't able to be that role model, influence, and encourager that I needed to be able to discover a sense of purpose for myself. So that's why I remarked on all the people in my life that did that for me outside the home. Those caring adults outside of my house, just like what we try to provide and elevate St. Louis. Uh, and there's also a high degree of physical and emotional abuse in my home too. And I saw some things that clearly, disturbed me and traumatized me and my family. Watching how my father and mother interacted and just a dominant, personality was. Now I'm happy to say though that later on in his life, he then came to faith, and he was completely transformed. And the last years of his life, he was exactly the father and husband that he needed to be. But if I take you back to my time growing up, though, home could be a joyous place, but it could also be a fearful place. And sometimes I didn't know what was happening in my life too. But at the same time, though, I always knew that there's something in me that was good and worthy of the investment. And
Hmm.
so throughout my life, I had people put me in challenging situations to really bring out the best in me. In work, I always advanced, from the hourly jobs that I had while I was in high school, where I was made supervisor, and assistant manager of a little Italian restaurant in the Central West End when I was 17 years old. And here I am leading an organization, restaurant staff that are 10, 15 years older than me. But the owners of the restaurant saw in me the ability to take on that responsibility to help open up the restaurant and close it, and have the security code to help receive deliveries and things too, and even pay vendors. But that was because people saw the potential in me, and because I had father hunger in me, I wanted to please those adults ahead of me in my life. And that persisted too into higher education as well. Like I said, I was revelous and without purpose until people came along to invest in my life, and then I was invited back to work at the university to help other students do the same thing.
Hmm.
They said, "Frank, you cracked the code. You figure out how to make the university work for you, and so we want you to teach that to others." So it was been, second chances given to me in my life, making the most of them,
Hmm.
and demonstrating to people that I want you to be proud of me, and so I'm going to use the wisdom you gave me and build a life of significance.
I think that's a powerful story, and one of the lessons I take from it is how critically important it is for us to be open to receiving, because all too often receiving is something that we have a great deal of difficulty with. But you had to be open to receiving the tutorage and the mentoring and the insights, and receiving the responsibility of becoming more than just a busman in a restaurant where suddenly you're essentially a management level. So we've talked a lot about your purpose. We've talked about how you've helped so many young adults and that you continue to through your efforts. You've raised a beautiful family with Rosa and your two children, 31 and 21 years of age at this point. When you sit back and take a look, Frank, share with us what's the point?
Well, the point for me is wanting to, first of all, present a family to a community that can help the community. My children have volunteered and helped in so many ways throughout their lives, and my wife and I, in addition to trying to be the best that we can be in the workplace, we've also been heavily invested in our church ministry as well, and working in communities in Iowa and back here now in St. Louis as well too. And so, for me, the purpose of what I do is, first of all, to reflect the tenets of my faith, to be that person who brings salt and light, and to be of support, but it's also to raise the collective prospects in any place that I'm a part of, and to make sure that I'm able to enhance by giving the best of myself, to hang in there with other people, and also to be a person of true compassion. We find in the New Testament a Greek translation for the word compassion is to suffer with. I know what it's like to suffer. I know what it's like to struggle, but I also know what it's like when people can come around me and help me to discover the best of my life. And so I believe that my early part of my life has shaped the productivity in my adult years. I believe I'm put here on this earth to serve in this era of history, to be able to help young people who have had similar backgrounds as me to discover that there is an enormous amount of potential in their lives, and they can make a difference, and they can advance any part of the region that they find themselves in.
Again, very powerful. And I, for one, just want to thank you and your entire staff, and frankly, the entire National Elevate organization for what you do. Because again, I believe very strongly in the ripple effect. And the more lives that can get touched in a positive way, the more in turn those people will pass that on. And goodness knows we need that these days. I'm so very grateful to Anthony Young for having pulled together that event that he did so many years ago that we could meet. I'm very grateful for your friendship. Those of you listening, Elevate St. Louis, Elevate National is a tremendous organization. What can you do to help? Maybe some monetary donation would help this effort, because it's a strong, powerful effort. And how you can do that, the information is going to be in the show notes. I encourage you to give. I encourage you to reach out to Frank in any way that you think you can help, and connect with this man and connect with his organization. Frank Bell, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the value that you give to others in our community. I appreciate it very much.
Bill, it's a pleasure to be on your show, What's the Point? And I really appreciate what you're doing to just call attention to so many great people around this nation who are doing good work. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.